I think there are two really giant macro events that are occurring in the world that have the most impact on firms, and one is very well known and one is not talked about much. The one that's very known is that 52% of the laboring force just entered the world economy. China and India have become integrated into the world economy, and we really have one world economically for the first time ever. This has never happened in world history before, and because of the sheer size of numbers, that's a huge event that impacts every organization. And we're still seeing the ramifications of this. You know, India and China have a huge amount of people who are studying computer science. Everyone thinks they're just going to do back office stuff, but that's not true at all. There's no truth to that. Wait till they start getting those schools up and running, which they're doing literally as we speak. You'll see rapid changes in the world. It's much harder to be a scientist now because there's more things to know from more countries. The second is the breakdown of the monopoly of useful knowledge that was held by the US, Western Europe, and Japan. For the last 100 years or so, three places had really all the sources of developing and using useful knowledge, technology, management knowledge, and this was, again, the US, Western Europe, and Japan. That's gone, and it's gone for good. The third change that probably brings us more to what I really know best is the absolute plummeting of information transaction costs. Information used to be a valuable thing. It was valuable to acquire it, to use it. It could make a fortune for you. That's changed with technology.
Today, after the dot-com boom, the world is loaded with dark fiber that's being lit up to bring us broadband. Now that we have that component, the cloud becomes the computer.
We live in the era of the dying dinosaurs. There's no question. The question is not, is there a need for organizations to change? The reality is that organizations will just disappear because the principles of the last era have now come to their limits. We have now learned that economy of scale, under the argument that it will bring efficiency, is no longer valid.
There are clearly some generational trends. I have, a son just entering the workforce now, and I was talking with him. He seems to want to work in what is increasingly being called the gig economy. No structured job, just a series of gigs, if you will, a series of part-time employment opportunities.
If you look to the younger generation, they have a much more totally different value set, and they're looking to what kind of value is the company bringing, to the society, to the shareholders, to the investment, to the consumers, to the employees, what have you. It's a much broader set of stakeholders that needs to be satisfied.
People like variety and motion and movement in their jobs. They don't like to be stuck in one place all the time doing the same thing. It's pretty clear that people are now working more or less all the time, working at home, working in Starbucks coffee bars, and so much more of a mix of work and so-called home life.
We used to have 110,000 employees. We currently have in the Netherlands 21,000 employees, and it's, in my opinion, not possible to really focus 21,000 employees on one thing. You have to get it smaller.
You can see the examples in the banks now. There are people in the top not really knowing what the primary process in the banks is. They don't even know what kind of bank they are. Read the stories, read the interviews. They were busy with among each other, but not with the business. There's still people in the top, and for them it counts for everybody. You can deal with in some situations with 15, maybe 20 people, and they only know 20 people out of the 200,000 part of the big organization. So they don't know what the other 19,980 people are really doing, what they're thinking, what their mentality is.
I worked in a division of IBM called Lotus Development Company. It's a well-known software. We never saw any, no one ever came to see us. So we were an important part, no one, ever. So the decisions that affected our lives were made by people we never spoke to.
The customer gets lost into the big company, and the people inside the big company have no clue what the customer really wants.
I would think the forms that we have of organizations today really came about in the late 19th century, middle to late 19th century, and it was based on the military, command and control hierarchies. That was the only model they had in the late 19th century, mid to late 19th century. The only model was the military. That's how you organize men to do this sort of work. And Henry Ford very famously said, "I don't want to pay for the worker's head, I only want his arm." That's gone. That's really, I mean, we still have to manufacture things, but robots, technology, and very cheap labor has displaced that. Everyone has to make money in different ways, and all those things are forms of knowledge: persuasion, creativity, design, various things, because you can't make, you know, a perfect example of this is Milan. You go to Milan, it's the second richest city in continental Europe. There's no manufacturing in Milan at all. What there is design. And they make a lot of money at that. So we have to fight more in terms of creating wealth. It's not going to be on manufacturing, and the firms are still organized on manufacturing basis. And that all has to, it's going to change, will change, although I don't think many of them will voluntarily change. I think they'll just sink like the dinosaurs into the mud and never know why they died. Will it look like a university? Maybe it'll look like Oxford or the Sorbonne or Harvard. Will it look like the UN or the World Bank? Will it look like a giant think tank? Will it look like something you and I haven't thought about yet? But it won't look like what it looks like now, because the sources of its value has shifted. It will not look, you won't have these large, hierarchical, silo-based firms anymore. Another reason, people don't want to work in them. They don't like working in those firms. They're not fun. Your ideas don't get heard. They're bureaucratic. And the people who rise to the top are not the people you most admire or respect. They're people who have power and focus, and they say, "I'm going to get ahead." But it's not people you really want to make decisions for you. So I think these firms will be much flatter. They'll be much more knowledge intensive, where the rewards will go more for finding ideas, developing ideas, sharing ideas. They'll look very different. Maybe they'll look like McKinsey or a large consulting firm. That probably, if I had a bet, I would think it'll be more like that.
The principles of the new era will be the different principles. And that's what we're now trying to find out in those days. Trees, you know what a tree is. You can see a big trees. They are beautiful, of course. They're very well impressive to see them, and we call them trees. Rhizomes are also plants, but you don't hardly see them because these are the roots under the surface, and they can be much, much more bigger than a tree. It's also a big organization. Only we experience them as many small plants at the surface. So that's the image I very often use. We will have more rhizomes in the future. It looks all kind of small organizations, but in some way they're all connected to each other. And that might be even much more bigger than the organization themselves. Because maybe you also can say we're not, maybe we live in the era of the dying dinosaurs, but something much bigger will come in place, not something smaller, something much bigger. But it will not be central controlled, it will not be the power in the center. So there will still people work together. This organizing will be still there.